Jordan Milsom, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for inviting me, Rob. Most appreciated.
My pleasure. It's good to finally get you on. Anyone doesn't know who you are,
Been
Jordan?
a while.
It has, mate. It has. You've been a busy man. Very busy man. But anyone that doesn't know who you are, would you mind just giving us a brief bio about you? Previous jobs, what you're doing now?
Previous jobs. So I've got a 17, 18-year career in football. So a one-sport man. Started off at Oxford United in 2005, whilst Jim Smith was in charge. At the time, they were currently in the football conference. And over, that period of time, I quite quickly moved from Oxford to Swindon. Spent a bit of time out in China, working for Sheffield United's affiliated club, Chengdu Blades. Back to Oxford United, from Oxford to Leicester City during the time that they were in League One, and we went up into the Championship, and then narrowly missed out on Premier League via the playoffs. And in 2010, I left Leicester to join Liverpool in a rehabilitation fitness role, and spent 8 years there under 4 managers, I think it was. And then left Liverpool in 2018 to go and work with Stephen, Glasgow Rangers, for 3.5 years. And then spent 12 months back in the Premier League with Aston Villa. And presently I am not working and enjoying some time with the family after an extensive period of working, and enjoying the things that you don't often get the chance to enjoy when you're full throttle in football.
I think there's going to be loads of things that we're going to chat about that I probably haven't spoken to many people about, or any people about, when it comes to the podcast. So I'm really excited to get into your career, your experiences as a manager's guy, experiences moving from a rehab role to a head of performance, and loads of stuff. But you mentioned there you're a one sport guy. Has there been any desire, any opportunities, any wants from your end to delve into another sport, or you just been solely football interested?
And there has been opportunities at different points, potentially basketball, AFL, the chance to work with Darren Burgess again, but just family circumstances probably put pay to that. And then at the time I was at Liverpool, and it was, Liverpool was my boyhood club. It was everything I'd ever wanted, never envisaged I'd get the opportunity to work there. So when you are there, it's difficult to take yourself away from that voluntarily, and take the plunge for something that, at times didn't feel overly right. And I also feel that there's a lot of value in just being a one club or a one sport individual as well. I think you learn a lot in other ways, and the game has clearly changed over 2 decades. It's not the same sport almost, so you are forever learning. I suppose there's advantages of being multi-sport and single sport and in all sports, but for me, the opportunities have been there to some extent, but they just never felt that they were the right time or the right moment.
It's become quite a common thing now, hasn't it? Probably 10 years ago, it was people in football were from football, but now you've got people like the FA who are actively recruiting people outside of football for whatever reason, good, bad, or indifferent. It's interesting how that will go, and if it's still going to be very much a mix. But you've got people like yourself who have been kind of football all the way through. But yeah, it's an interesting one. But from your perspective, going from S&C coach down the rehab route, and the rehab is often something that's bolted on to an S&C coach's role, especially in smaller clubs when you're doing multiple jobs. But why was it the rehab role what was about the rehab role that interested you to kind of pursue that line?
Well, when I first got my job at Liverpool, it was initially a sports scientist role. When I seen the job spec, it didn't light me up inside, to be honest, but it was Liverpool, and that's what lit me up. So I thought, the opportunity to get in at Liverpool And naturally, just the way football is, that the role will evolve somewhat, over time. But the main thing was just getting in, and I didn't think it was going to evolve as quickly as it did. But at the time, they had a role advertised for strength and rehabilitation fitness coach, which I didn't know about. It was almost a done deal, I believe, through contacts and that Peter Bruckner, Darren Burgess, Phil Coles had probably had in Australia. So there was a guy who was due to come over, but he had an issue with visa complications or some issue, and he couldn't come. And over the first month of working with Darren, I had to perform, sports scientist role, and I had to largely perform the rehab role as well as the strength and conditioning role. So it was quite a full-on role. But that was pretty much doing a lot of those activities anyway in all my previous roles. So other than probably the early and late stage rehab, and then Darren essentially just said, "Look, there's going to be an opportunity. The guy who was meant to come can't come. Would you be interested in the role?" And I was like, "Well, if it was a toss up between the two roles, I'd have took the rehab, strength and rehab role anyway, because I had a real keen interest in strength and conditioning over the early part of my career, and clearly, fitness is a key element of a fitness coach's role as well. So, trying to understand like rehab in that setting as well was probably quite novel back then, and it really excited me. So quite quickly my job spec changed, and I found myself as strength and rehabilitation fitness coach, which was great.
And this is where you got close to Stephen during injuries when he was out of the game?
A combination, because the role was pretty much like lead S&C coach. So you were working with the squad, on health and performance. But then I was also working rehabilitation, and it wasn't until probably a few years into that role that we kind of chopped it up a little bit, because the role was just too big, to be a full-time S&C coach and work with 20 plus players when you're essentially on your own for year one. And then couple that with, almost being, at any club, you would probably have 2, 3, 4 physios that would look after injured players. Now, granted, they're doing bed-based stuff along with, pitch and gym. But, the rehab role for me it was, every little bit of exercise essentially that the player was doing was part of my remit. So coupling that with an S&C role, which is looking after the team performance, was quite extensive. So I had a combination of experiences. I had a combination of just kind of develop performance with all the players, but Stephen being one of them. And then, due to the nature, I spent times in rehab with him. When I joined Liverpool, Stephen was on the other side of 30. I think he was 30, 31. So, maybe a little bit more prone to injury, a few miles on the clock. So, yeah, there were certainly times that I had to spend with him. Some of them were probably easier than others. But, I wouldn't change that, because they were all great, great experiences and great learning curves.
There's probably a lot of S&C coaches, well, hopefully there's a lot of S&C coaches listening to this that have got that rehab side of the role. And let's be honest, there's not many Liverpools or Man Uniteds or Man Cities knocking around where there's 5 physios and there's 3 rehabbers and there's 4 S&C coaches. Predominantly, S&C coaches are probably doing the nutrition, they're doing the rehab. Where were you going? Like you said at the time, it was quite a novel role, and there's still people in that kind of mindset with it, one-man band type of situations. Where were you going when it comes to the education to upskill yourself? I know you're doing the rehab before you went to Liverpool, but where were you going for your education? Because there's clearly gaps from an S&C coach in this side. So where were you going?
When I started working in football, I would say, probably from around my Leicester City days, I really tried to evolve my understanding of strength and conditioning in football, or, sport in general. So I spent a lot of time with Alex Martin, who was at the time, I think he was head of performance at Leicester Tigers, currently at Bath Rugby. And he was such an out-the-box thinker when it comes to strength and power development, I felt. So we had a lot of sharing of ideas, but clearly Alex had a greater depth of knowledge and experience in that space than I did, because probably one, of his age, and two, his background, and the fact that there was more emphasis on strength and power development in rugby than potentially there was in football. Tristan Bevan was another person back then who was at the Cardiff Blues, who's been on a bit of a journey since, but is back at Cardiff Blues. He was someone else who was doing a lot of innovative work around S&C. And Rob Newton, we had an affiliation through Paul Milsom, who was my boss at Leicester, who again was a great individual for challenging, status quo and how you thought, about things, and having a rationale for why you're doing what you're doing. But he was another person who was really innovative, I thought, back then. So those individuals, I felt it was a great opportunity to learn from people who've done, similar type roles in other sports. So I spent a lot of time basically picking their brains, I would say, over a number of years, and that kind of shaped a little bit of my S&C philosophy, and how I would develop, or focus on certain ways of developing players and performance. From that, moved into Liverpool, and then I wouldn't say there was any textbooks per se. I went through UKSCA, CSCS, this was many years ago. I didn't actually complete my UKSCA in the end. Ended up doing CSCS, BASIS accreditation, and then just learning from people in Liverpool's environment. There was a lot of outstanding physios there who, when you socially immerse yourself in their environment, you learn a lot. You wouldn't say you become an expert, but you do learn a lot from conversations and just being, present around those people, watching and observing things. So a lot of my learning has come from other people, not necessarily from textbooks, just observing. There's obviously been elements of reading. I've done, an undergraduate, a master's, a professional doctorate. There's clearly been, underpinnings of learning there, but, just observing practitioners and all the different ways that people operate, because, that's the beauty of it. There's just so many skills and so many different ways that you can achieve success, I believe, and successful programs. And it's about kind of being selective and taking out the key things that you really think are valuable, and piecing them all together.
I think that's probably a good excuse me, that's a pretty good summary of what so many people have said when it comes on the podcast, when it comes to that rehab side of an S&C coach's role. It's just immersion with physios and other rehabbers rather than traditional routes, because there isn't really a traditional route. It's almost just learning on the job to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think from an S&C standpoint, it's probably a little bit more. I wouldn't say simplistic, but there's less chaos in that environment. So the pitch stuff, I think, can be a little bit more complex. And again, there's different ways of skinning cats and achieving success. Matt Tabben has been, published some really wonderful work around the continuum chaos, or chaos continuum, or control to chaos, should I say. But again, my philosophy on rehab was, I tried to be quite simple with it. You go from slow to fast, from easy to complex. Just from build volume up sensibly, build intensity up sensibly, without going into all these different GPS markers. Just being very, simple in your approach of, you've got to build volume progressively, you've got to build intensity progressively. The complexity of that evolves over, the course of the rehabilitation. And I was very much orientated around, using the ball, and trying to elicit everything through football type activities, manipulating spaces and, intensive, extensive, all that stuff, which we all know of, but didn't feel the need to go super detailed into things, but just would be really, really good at the basics, and plan, deliver, and evaluate really effectively, and communicate that with the other stakeholders.
Gone through the transition from kind of S&C coach to rehab, but the next transition was to head of performance. Was when you were at Liverpool, was that always the route that you wanted to go, or did that kind of just happen as career happened and relationships happened and opportunities happened?
Well, I think over the first kind of 5 years of my career, I was what you term a fitness coach. At the time there was generally only one of them per club. You might start to evolve with some interns and maybe an S&C coach, but generally it was a one-man band for the first kind of 5 years. So you're doing a bit of everything. I then go to Liverpool where you're part of a team of 15, and I'm in this specialist role. But I always had touching points with, one, the performance side of it through the S&C role, and then two, under different managers, there was a bit more exposure with, on a day-to-day basis around training. So there was a time when Rylan Morgans was there. He used to go on international duty with Wales, so I'd end up covering a lot of the training groups during that period of time because I'd been there for a period of time myself, and I was probably the most senior staff member. So I ended up finding myself looking after those elements of it. When there's leftover players for games, taking that group of players on a Saturday or a Sunday morning for some content, can be quite challenging that for some people. So it's not an easy role to have to take a number of players who aren't in the squad, but I always felt that I had a decent enough relationship with players, and they understood the situation that I and they were in, and everyone's professional, so they do what they need to do. So I always had kind of one hand on that anyway, and was exposed to that performance side of it. I watched a lot of different people kind of come and go, from Darren Burgess, Glenn Driscoll, Ryland to some extent, who was kind of working under or alongside Glenn, and then one of the Andreas, who came in my second season at Jürgen. So just watched and observed how a lot of those individuals worked, and at different moments felt that I could contribute and help, and probably at other moments felt there's things that I probably wouldn't have done if I was in that position. So I wouldn't say I naturally wanted to progress into that role, but if the opportunity came, then I'd consider it. I didn't envisage it to come about in the way it did through Stephen getting into coaching, but at that moment it just felt right. I'd done 8 years at Liverpool. He was on a journey to be a manager, and to work alongside someone who I had a good relationship with from a personal and professional standpoint, in a different capacity, to work alongside him and be a part of his management team. I always, it was difficult to say no to, and I'd seen a couple of managers come with their staff, and it is different, being a manager's man to being a club man. It's different. It comes with different perks. It comes with different challenges as well. But when it goes well, it can be really, really rewarding and feel really valuable.
How did you cope with it, dealing with managers' men, like who were brought in by, whether they were foreign or English, but brought in directly by the manager as a club man? We'll flip that in a minute, because obviously you became that manager's man. But how did you deal with that?
Well, when Brendan came in, he brought Glenn, and Glenn had a really interesting background. He was a physio initially, or sorry, he was a sports scientist initially, and then had a physio degree, one or the other way around. But he had a really good understanding of both areas. And I felt when he came into that role, because he had such a good understanding of one, being a physio and the medical element or the medical side of things, coupled with the fact that he come from also from a sports science background, and two, he knew his model, he knew the way the manager worked, they had their methodology, and he was really confident and comfortable in how that would be delivered. So, we always knew what training was going to look like, which can be really valuable. He had a really good understanding of performance and medical. And I admired Glenn for that. I thought he did that role really well. And because he was the manager's man, it all ran a little bit more smoother than maybe some other experiences had. He was English as well, so there's that side of things. Maybe that might help. Maybe when you get foreign staff, there's the language might be a bit of a challenge. Their perceptions or their biases towards how you train, whether that be on the pitch or the gym, is potentially different, and can be I wouldn't say confrontational, but can almost be a little bit out there at times, or can feel like that to us. Them individuals could probably feel like it's the opposite way around as well, So I've definitely been in that position where the boot's been on the other foot. So I understand where they're coming from in that sense. But some experiences are easier than others, and some challenge. There's some extra challenges that might exist, potentially with foreign staff, or in my experiences, potentially with foreign staff. But they're all really good experiences, and once you then move across into that space and the boots on the other foot, then you kind of understand why people have been the way they've been. And I was certainly guilty of maybe not seeing their position or seeing it through their lens, and being more biased towards my own lens. And when the shoe's on the other foot, it's certainly a different challenge, and you respect that a little bit more.
There are many S&C coaches and physios probably who think of the head of performance as the kind of pinnacle of where they want to get to. But in terms of your transition to a head of performance, what areas, when you got there at Rangers, what areas were you underprepared in? Because I'm guessing you get in there and it's a new club, it's a new environment, it's a new role, new expectations. You're thinking, oh, I wasn't expecting this, or I wish I could be more up to date on this area. What were those areas that you were underprepared? No, the only reason I'm asking that is to maybe allow people to go, okay, Jordan identified that. Maybe I could plug that gap in my own knowledge and experience for when I make that transition.
Yeah, it's a great question, Rob. And it's definitely, in my experience, there's certainly facets of the role that I was underprepared for. So just simply leading people. I had never led people before. I've been when I was coming through early in my career, and I was in kind of that head role, but there was no one to manage. We didn't have any staff. You might get one intern here or there, so there's no one to manage, and then you move into the role at Liverpool. You're very much in the detail of everything every day. It's a very the micro details of the job. You're amazed in that, and you're working as part as an MDT and just facilitating information more laterally and upwards. And not really managing anyone. So then going to Rangers, and the club's vision was to be the number one team in Scotland within, I think it was 3 to 4 years. And when we went in and had a little bit of a needs analysis and look around, well, how was I going to help support that process? Well, we needed to beef out the staff. We needed more staff to perform, the roles that were going to be needed to support the players to give ourselves the best chance of being, successful. So we had to grow it from a department of, I think it was 5 to 15 in the end over 3 years. But in terms of being underprepared, you've got to lead people. People, power, and politics. It can be really challenging. So, I've gone from not working really with anyone or managing anyone to then inheriting, recruiting, developing, and managing staff. And that's a skill. I remember David Joyce talking about it a little bit. You just find yourself in these roles because you're either the longest serving staff member or you were really good potentially in a particular area, and as a consequence you naturally just find yourself leading the department, and then you come away from all the tasks that you were probably really good at, and I was very much a micro detail person. I was, in my role focused on rehab, planning, delivering, evaluating on this cycle and making sure that was really well, even though I said I'm a bit of a, come at it from a bit of a basic perspective, it was just making sure that was done really well and really thorough. And now you're almost in the telescope and you're managing, 15 people, and you've got to step back, and you're not in that micro detail every day. You're more across a multitude of areas, and it can be challenging. And that, I was definitely not prepared for that. I had skills, I think I'm quite an understanding person, can relate to people, can relate to situations, but it's definitely a challenge when you've got to, manage people from the age of 18 to 60 from different domains, from sports science, S&C, doctors, physios, even physio departments where a person's been there for 6 months versus 16 years, they know the club inside out. It's definitely difficult. So I'd say that was an area that I was probably a bit underprepared for, but I think going in with the manager gives you a level of credibility. I think my background gave me a little bit of credibility. I definitely think that my experience of being a rehab fitness coach and sitting in the camp of doctors, physios, different medics, S&C, fitness, sitting in all those camps for 8 years really helped me when it comes to supporting those individuals or holding competent conversations with those individuals or those groups. But yeah, probably more the leadership and strategic thinking and managing of people were probably the areas that I was underprepared for. And I would suggest anyone who is going to go into any of those roles is, if you want to stay one step ahead, probably immerse yourselves in those areas. I think it's a bit more natural now. I think it is happening a little bit more. This was, kind of 5 years ago for me, but it's probably is happening a little bit more. But if you have aspirations of moving into those areas, then I think you should get the ball rolling and immerse yourself in some of those environments or on some of those courses, or speaking to people who perform those roles, whether it be clubs or organisations, sport or business. I think there's loads of value in different sectors.
You said it gave you the credibility being associated with the manager, but did it also bring some skepticism as well? Like maybe like you'd had on the flip side when the manager's guy came in, like this guy could potentially just come and go. Like he could get another club and he disappears. We're all staying here. How did you deal with that?
I think at Rangers was a bit different because we didn't really have, the staffing in place, and the club was desperate to just become what it was. So there was I think Stephen galvanised the whole club, and everyone just kind of got on the journey. There was certainly bumps along the way and potentially doubts and tough times and tough conversations at certain points, but there was definitely it was easier. I think when you're going into the Premier League, so turbulent, there's a lot of good people who work in the Premier League, but there's also at times you've got to build relationships, and sometimes to change processes and practices and get the method and the processes across that you want takes time. You don't always get that, and sometimes practitioners, if they want to be, could be slowing the uptake or slowing the development for that, and it could, yeah, you're only ever a few games away from the sack. So, if it can be a bit more challenging. There's definitely a little bit of that, like without a doubt. I mean, people will probably think it's all, you know, sun shining, but it's not. There's a lot of complexities. There's a lot of difficulties. It's certainly not just a linear trajectory and path of progress. There's a lot of complexities and bumps along the way there, and I think one of those things of the inherent volatility of the sport can impact on your ability to actually put the processes in place that you might want, or go down the avenue that the coaches and the manager and you believe are the right ways to go.
So with this upskilling, or ideally upskilling in the leadership and the management side, what from your personal experience is de-skilled? Was there any de-skilling going on? Have you found that since leaving Villa that you think, oh wow, I haven't read a journal on ACLs for 5 years or whatever it is? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think definitely my read material changed. Yeah, for sure. And it can be a bit of a kick to the ego, if you want to call it that. Yeah, you're used to being really knowledgeable in a particular area, and then you've got to broaden your horizons and be a bit more holistic again and learn new skills. And then naturally, as a consequence of that, you become a little bit maybe behind the times. And there's things that we tried to do to stay on top of that, around putting time aside to learn certain things, or collectively focusing on topics, and then people, feeding them back at different moments. So we're all kind of, in the loop for some, you know, whether that be a little journal club of some description, but those types of themes. Um, Hands-on wise, I'd say de wouldn't say de-skilled per se, but you become a little bit rusty, in terms of delivering in the gym, because you're not necessarily doing that every day. So they were things that naturally just de-skilled or got a bit rusty, because I'm putting a lot of time into trying to develop other areas that were potentially a bit more important for the role I was in at that moment. Since coming out, I've had the beauty of being able to have more time, and that time I've tried to spend probably more around leadership, strategic thinking, culture development, all that. Focusing, I've been doing some online business courses through Oxford Uni, which has been really beneficial and helpful. Whilst also spending a little bit of time on some of those simple principles, and getting back into physiology and biomechanics, and anatomy. And then I've spent the last 3 months working at R4P as a bit of a rehab conditioner again. So, working with technologies that I've not seen for a while, or different types of technologies, working with different types of athletes of different levels, and individuals of different shapes and sizes that, you don't necessarily always see in football. So that's been really good. And then working with Matt Konopinski again, who's, outstanding, and laying off him every day. So it's been nice to sharpen my sword again somewhat in that area. So yeah, like anything, I think you can't be an expert in everything, and you have to accept that. And I'm perfectly comfortable with that. But I also understand, and I have the mindset of wanting to grow, and I felt like the areas that I needed more growth for the future, I potentially, want, needs more leadership, management, people management, and kind of strategic thinking, understanding, and development.
You mentioned right at the start, a little bit ago, people, power, and politics. And not to say there's a link here, but people will think head of performance at Aston Villa, head of performance at a Premier League club. You go in there, boom, it's just onwards and upwards. And obviously, you've mentioned the reality, which is the volatility, the pressure that comes with that. You're obviously the manager's guy, so if it goes well, there's obviously, like you said, there's the perks. But if it doesn't go well, there's the inevitable of what happens. Was there anything that surprised you going into that role as head of performance at Villa that you maybe weren't expecting? I always mentioned about things you weren't prepared for, but any surprises of not how it played out, but just that initial, didn't realise it'd be kind of like this, or I didn't have to be dealing with this?
Yeah, there probably was. I think you're going into a Premier League club, so they've obviously got good infrastructure. There's good people there. But I'd imagine for them, it was the first time that they've had to work, in a while at least, that they've had to work with a manager's man. And then I think the uniqueness of this situation was it was a manager's man and it's English staff. There isn't a lot of English managers in the Premier League, and maybe they don't necessarily have the support staff that Stephen had. It was almost like a foreign staff who are from England and speak English. But it's probably quite rare, so there was probably a little bit of uniqueness there. So there's like I say, there's different challenges to every role, but there was certainly surprises. Yeah, without going into too much detail, yeah, there was definitely surprises, but you try and navigate them the best you can, and ultimately we're all there for the team to be successful. That's what everyone's going into work for, I believe, every day, is to help contribute to make the team perform as best as he can. People have different views on how to achieve that, and with even within the same sector, they'll probably all have different biases at any given moment of what we should and shouldn't do in certain situations. My role was to try and take away try and get everyone to work as cohesively as possible, which is not always easy in a football club when you haven't built relationships. But get to that point, and get to the point where everyone feels valued and everyone's contributing, but also understand that we can have disagreements, we can not always agree with each other, but we'll come to a decision and we'll walk out of that room and we're living by that decision, and no matter what goes wrong, we're all together on that. And I tried to put myself at the front of let's go with this decision, let's make sure we're all on board, and and if it doesn't work out, within a high performance environment, our job is to be high performers, and sometimes that involves taking calculated risks. But as long as we feel like there's enough information to support why we're making those decisions in that particular manner, if it goes wrong, it's gone wrong together, not as an individual. No one will be pointed out. I think it's really important to make sure that people understand that. We'll have good times and bad times, but at no point should we, point any fingers at anyone in particular. As long as we're all together and we all work as one, I think it's really important. But not saying it wasn't like that at Villa, but it can be challenging to achieve that in football clubs, and maybe the volatility of the sport contributes to that potentially.
And then, unfortunately, things didn't go as well as you wanted at Villa, and you guys left the club. And it's one thing that I think I spoke to one person about it maybe, but everyone realizes there's this kind of, there is the volatility, this undertone of everyone's going to get sacked at some point. So I'd like to ask you about your experiences of going through that, if that's all right, if that's not too much of a personal insight. Is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine. Look, like I said earlier on, I think when you make the decision to work with a manager, then you accept that there's there's good times and there's bad times. Unless you're Pep Guardiola, there's very, yeah, I think everyone's going to experience it at some point. So 12 months before leaving Villa, we left Rangers to on the back of perceived or team success, and as a consequence of that, got an opportunity to move to Villa and work in the Premier League again. That was deemed to not be enough 12 months later, and then you lose your job. But I accept that. I don't. It can be a little bit stressful at times, but it's that's what I chose to do. So if I don't want to do that, I've got the freedom to go and try and be a club appointment somewhere and or find a new industry, a new sector. But this is what I love doing, and I've committed to to doing what I'm doing, and for as long as Stephen wants me to work with him, or for as long as he wants to be a manager, then I'll probably continue to do that. And we'll see where that takes us. But it's not nice. It's certainly not nice. But it's also not shouldn't always be a reflection of your own performance. And I remember someone saying something along those lines to me. Like if you work in the sport long enough, you're likely to lose your job, but it's not always a reflection of your competence. I've seen people, good staff who have been moved on at other clubs, because the manager's bringing in an individual that clashes with them. Whether it be analyst, whether it be a physio, whether it be a fitness coach, and they were club appointments and they were removed from their role because the manager had someone else to do their job. Now they'd done a really good job prior to that. They weren't getting released because of their competence. They were just getting released because that's the industry, rightly or wrongly. Maybe we need better protection around contracts of payoffs or whatever you want to call it. Severance packages. 3 months seems a bit unfair, really. You could give years to a club and you get what, 3 months? I mean, it's for what? Because some person's bringing in someone who performs your role. And I was always mindful of that, particularly at Rangers, because I'd seen that happen at other clubs, and the last thing I wanted was to move people out of roles, particularly when they're from the area, when they, supporters of the club and stuff like that. I think it's got to give people a chance, and you've got to find roles and adapt, and there's enough opportunity in football clubs to manipulate roles and find opportunities to not have to do that sometimes, I think. And respect that they'll probably be there long after you're gone, and I think that always stuck in my mind to some extent, because I'd seen it happen to other people and probably felt at different moments during my career at Liverpool that could happen to me just through managers changing, you know how it is. But I'd have been really upset if that happened to me. So maybe that's just the human and the soft side of me kicking in, but I think it's I also think it's important as well.
Having gone through what you've been through with Villa, looking back to your time at Liverpool when you were a club man, would you have done anything differently to protect yourself contractually then, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, probably when I was at Liverpool. Yeah, I don't think I had. Yeah, my contract was a permanent contract, but permanent doesn't mean anything in football. There was no release clause. There was no payoff or contractual agreement that I would have some form of protection. And maybe that's just the naivety of wanting to get a job at Liverpool and then just taking what comes your way. Because I was young. I don't know, probably about 28 at the time. So been working in football for 5 years. It was the dream. So I'm probably not going to read the finer details around what happens if they want to move me on for something out of my control. But maybe we do need a bit of protection there. I'm not sure what the right way to go about that is, but whether that's, doing your own due diligence yourself or getting solicitors and lawyers involved, or maybe there should be, you might know better than me, maybe there's individuals out there through, the LMA and these type of organisations that can provide that support potentially for staff moving clubs or even current staff to evaluate where they're at, because there certainly should be a bit more protection, I feel, especially if you're getting let go under those circumstances when it's certainly not a reflection of you doing your job. I think there should be more support and more protection there for sure, because it's a difficult industry to stay in. There's so many people who want to get into it, and there's not enough jobs, so it's there's a bottleneck there, and there's an overspill, and if you fall out of it, it can be quite challenging to get back in, I'd imagine, at times.
Just thinking back to that time at Liverpool, would you not have, if you'd have understood, I'm in a bit of a sticky spot here in case anything happens, new manager comes in, wants to get rid of me, my contract isn't as watertight as maybe I'd want it, would you have, at 28, 29, 30, would you have had the foresight and the confidence to go to a senior member of staff and say, I want to reevaluate my contract? Or do you just think, I'm at Liverpool, I'm just going to keep my head down and do my best and hope this doesn't happen? Because I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who know the situation they're in, but maybe don't know where to go and maybe just keep their head down because they don't want to identify themselves as someone that wants to protect themselves, because we've all been in football clubs, because that isn't conducive sometimes to not getting a bit of shit from other members of staff, or things can turn sour pretty quickly, can't they?
Yeah, they can. Look, I think probably the one person at a football club that would have that type of protection, or the understanding of that protection, would be the manager, because those contracts are certainly those details are discussed in terms of coming in and going out the door. So maybe those individuals, I for one probably wouldn't have spoke to anyone initially. After a couple of years in the job with a bit more credibility under your belt almost, or experience of doing a job and relationships that you have, then maybe I would have in hindsight. But it can certainly be something that gets overlooked, and even if you did then pick up on it, find it difficult to have those conversations. I probably would have found it difficult, to be honest with you. I don't like having those conversations around money and security and all that, but they're really important. Some people can have them quite comfortably, others find it a bit of a challenge. But I could imagine someone, especially when you're going into a big organisation like Liverpool or one of the top Premier League clubs, unless it's actually organised for you and it's done for you and the contract is set out like that before you start, then it could be challenging. And half the time, people are just trying to, get that opportunity, get that experience, get that exposure. That that's the side they probably don't really evaluate. But maybe it's worth, making sure that you get what you want going through, and you get what you should get on the way out. That's another saying I've heard through being in these circles. Check your contract going in and check your contract going out, because they're, two important facets.
I remember on that, at a very much lower level than you've been exposed to, but a particular manager going in, the first meeting before signing the contracts was, how much do I get paid when you sack me? And that probably is true. Maybe not for a member of staff, but you're never going to be as powerful as whatever member of staff you are, while until you sat at that negotiating table, because they want you to work for them. So sort it out before you even get in the door is I suppose the key, isn't it?
Yeah. But look, there's obviously less volatility in other roles, but they're certainly not the most secure roles in the world either. So yeah, it's definitely worthwhile evaluating both elements of it.
Do you have any experience? I know you've mentioned a few organisations there, probably for managers and whatnot with LMA, etc. Is there anyone actually acting or able to act for support staff in these kind of situations? Anything you know of, support-wise?
Unfortunately, I don't. I mean, I think there must be something out there, but maybe I've missed something and I've not needed it, you know. But if there isn't, then there's probably value in someone, performing that role, even if it's just through the Premier League. There's got to be a little bit of support for support staff. Now, someone might come on and tell us there is, and that's great. But I don't know of any. But hopefully there is.
Right, mate. I'm going to let you go and get back on with your evening. But I really appreciate your insights. I think
Thank you.
It's some of these things are not easy to talk about. Certainly you might find them easy now because you've pretty spoken to people about it. But from my side, it's not a particularly nice thing to talk about. But it's the reality, isn't it? So it's good to chat it through, and hopefully will resonate with people that are unfortunately going through it or have been through it and are trying to mitigate the risk of going through it. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Rob. It was nice to talk about my experiences, and hopefully people find a little bit of value in what we spoke about.
No, thanks, mate.
Or if
really
not,
appreciate it.
they've wasted an hour at a time.
No, thanks, mate. Speak soon.
Yeah, take care. All the
Cheers,
best,
buddy.
Rod.